Today we're talking with Mark Schlichting, the creator of Living Books. Mark, thank you for taking the time to talk with us. Can you tell us about how you came about creating Living Books and how it was work starting that up?
I'd love to, Mickey. It's my pleasure to talk to you. Actually, the idea for Living Books comes back from when I was a child. I was always in love with picture books. And one of my very favorites was Horton Hears a Who by Dr. Seuss, because I loved going inside the world of Whoville. And he had drawn all these really weird instruments with lots of things coming out and buttons to push. And I always wanted to go inside Whoville and play with those instruments and play with the other things, the toys they had in there. And many years later, as I became an artist and an animator doing digital work, I had this idea of wanting to do an interactive storybook. But we were in the days of floppy disks and, how many, 3 disks, that took 3 disks or 4 disks, and you had a long install. It was very slow and you couldn't have a lot of animation, very limited and very little amount of audio. And then we were looking at the promise of CD-ROM, that you could store more on it, but a CD-ROM was a storage device and it was single speed at the time. It was a wonderful place. And within 3 months, I had talked one of my bosses into letting me create a little prototype of my idea. And we had a beta copy of what later became Director. And I was able to animate and put the pieces together. And it was interesting because I was the newer employee, and all of a sudden I was getting new computers and new color Macs and multiple monitors and getting to do my own thing in a room full of everyone else working on the other projects that they were assigned. And I know that there's a thing about creating a shared vision where you want to have everyone be part of what you're building. And so as I was building the prototype, I had everybody in the office be a voice or a sound effect for things that were going on the screen. My boss was a barking dog, and my boss's boss was a piece of grass or a fire hydrant or something silly, but they were interactive things. And it turned out that we have this deep connection to our voice that even when I had an animator who might have animated all of a Dr. Seuss title, but they were also one little voice in there somewhere. When they got a hold of the CD-ROM, they went right to where their voice was, not to where their animation was, because they'd go, "That's me, that's me." And even when I was demoing, we'd hear that. And so I built this little 2-page demo, and Philips Corporation came through because we were on the tour. The Artists and Animators role was on a tour when other big companies came through. And I showed them the Living Books. Oh, it wasn't called Living. We were figuring out the name for it at the time. And they got very excited. And then they turned around and they offered us $500,000 to build one title for them for a new set-top box they were building. So all of a sudden, my little my little group of one had funding, and we kind of dove off into, okay, how do we do this? How do we build a whole storybook? How do we get it to play? That was the hard part. And we had several great programmers, but one of them that really drove us forward a lot was a young programmer, a brilliant programmer named Matt Siegel. And Matt had the idea of that we could suck our animations out of Director, because I wanted to direct the animations to be, we created them the way we wanted and then use them other places. And he figured out that we could suck the data out of Director and then make our own player and then play it out to different platforms. And so we ended up building one of the very first cross-platform multimedia titles. Way back in, we were building it in 89 and 90, and I think we released in 91 the first title, Grandma and Me, which is why it's so exciting to have it come around again now, these many years later. And they did a lot of other really brilliant things because we were building into the smallest color Macs that were available at the time. I think it was the LC or something, and it was the screen size was 512 384. It was tiny. It was like this little, like a postage stamp on this side of the screen, and that included 40 interactive buttons and all of the dialogue and the words, everything. And how do we cram all that into something that small? And they figured out a lot of really good tricks. One of them being like compressing a lot of the graphics and animation into RAM and then exploding it onto the screen just as we needed it. So you didn't have to load it into RAM and then play it. And really some brilliant things. And it looked really simple, but it was simply beautiful. And it was 2 or 3 years before any of the big competitors could even put a title up near us, because we had really solved some of the real problems from turning the CD-ROM drive from a storage device into a player. We also had a lot of other wonderful people on our, it was kind of a ragtag team of people. Sometimes I think they were giving me the people that they were the biggest hassle to work with, but they were also wonderful talent and great people. And like we had to figure out how to take a storybook and be true to the characters and animate them in a digital format. And like Arthur, I was the first one to give Arthur a voice and create a personality for them. And that was beyond what you saw in the books. And in fact, we bought Mark Brown his first multimedia computer, and I got to fly out to his house and show it to him. And he was amazed. This is all years before the Arthur television show. And we think sometimes that we were helped him to go that place. But one of our artists was Barbara Lawrence Webster, and Barbara, we had to repaint things. We had to take them from scanning them and then repaint them so they didn't have all the dots from printing in them, but it had to look just like the original pieces. And then we had to break them up so we could animate them and put them on layers. We could put them through pieces. And she did a wonderful job of doing that. And Barbara was also a bird person and would bring her pet birds into the office, and they'd be walking around on the cubicles and come over and sit on your shoulder for a while and chew on your ear. And Broderbund was a wonderful place like that. It was very collegiate, and people sometimes brought their dogs to work, and you'd find a dog sleeping under your desk sometimes. It felt like family. It was a great place. And another one of our artists was Donna Bonifield, and she was she studied at Cal Arts in animation, the Disney School. But Donna was someone who her father or grandfather had taught her to look under the hood. Don't be afraid to lift up the hood and look under the hood. And he opened up the hood to their old truck and taught her how things worked. And she applied that to going and working with our programmers. And before this, most of the programmers each built their own product. And somebody would build a Carmen Sandiego for this platform, and then another one would build it for this platform, and they were all separate. And we were doing something that was very different, and we put them all together in one room, working on the same project. And Donna would go down every day and spend time with them, and twirl her drumsticks and sit with them and look at what they were working on and say, what's this over here? And how does that work? And what does that do? And she helped to make that connection, to be the conduit between what we wanted in the design side to what the programmers could come up with on their side. And her presence there, I think, really cemented them together. And I secretly think that many of them were in love with her. But she was wonderful at being able to make that connection, and has gone on to work with some of those programmers for years now. And in fact, probably the next, Matt Siegel that I mentioned earlier, he's come back and he's been working with Donna for years as a company. Matt has been helping Mickey rebuilding living books for Wonderful and get them to play on all these different platforms. And he has been working continuously, I hear, for 122 months consecutively rebuilding living books to work on all the various platforms that Mickey has it going on. Another one of our main players was Joey Edelman. And Joey is a musician, a great jazz pianist. And he also did all of our sound effects in the beginning, for sure, all of Just Grandma and Me. And Joey was amazing because I could tell him what I was looking for and hum a little bit of something, and he would turn around and sit down and play it. It was just like magic. He wrote the theme for Just Grandma and Me and several of our other themes. And it was just a joy to work with him because he just could make it happen, and it was beautiful and fun. And in fact, one day we heard that the CEO of Broderbund, Doug Carlson, was coming over to visit our little group who we've been stuck up in this weird kind of attic where we were all working together, and we didn't have an opening for Living Books, and a little stinger piece of music and opening animation. And I said, Joey, we need something, it's just a little piece that's like this long and goes like this. And he just turned around and wrote the opening music. And then I had the animators animated it, just that piece of the Living Book logo coming in and coming together. And we did it in like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, the whole thing. So that when Doug came to visit us, we said, here's our opening piece of animation, And so that sometimes magic like that happened regularly, actually, when we were putting things together. With that wonderful piece of music for Just Grandma and Me, I knew that multimedia was becoming a new thing, and stores everywhere were having, they showed all their multimedia machines, and they needed an attract mode. They needed something to get you to come over and look at them. So at the beginning of Living Books, I built an interface where the main character talks to you through the wall here and says, hey, if you'd like to, hi, I'm Little Critter. And if you want to play inside the story, click here. And if you want to have the story read to you, click here. And then if you clicked on one of those, he would agree and go, yeah, great, let's go. And you would take off. But if you didn't, he would begin dancing. So he's dancing to this piece of music that Joey wrote. And in those days, spending a lot of time on animation was not always a good idea because it was expensive and not everybody wanted you to do that. But I felt like it was worthwhile to do this because it would work in stores. And Michael Dashow was one of our main animators of the characters, and he animated the Little Critter dance. And what we did was everybody on the team figured out a dance move that Little Critter could do, and then Michael animated them. So the doing the wave or doing the maracas or doing any of those kind of moves, we all did them for Michael, and then Michael, he put them in. Michael went on to become art director for many big games companies, and is still doing wonderful things. In fact, everyone on our team has gone on to do great things. I'm very proud of everybody. And my number 2 person at Living Books for years is Bridget Erdman. And Bridget and I met in animation school at San Francisco State. She was a full-time student, and I was somebody who wanted to come back and study traditional animation. And we became fast friends, and we worked on a bunch of different special effects projects together. And she went off to Atari coin-op games. And when Living Books happened, I called her, and she was like there on the drop of a hat. She was so excited about it and just jumped in and took it on. And Bridget's a wonderful combination of a great animator and a wonderful producer, which is a very rare thing, and became the number 2 person at Living Books for the next 10 years. So thank you, Bridget. And now doing wonderful work in VR. So people don't just stop and go away. I think they continue to follow their path. When we finally released our first title, Just Grandma and Me, in 1991, I think it was, Bill Gates demoed it at TED conference, early TED conference. And the fact that we got a lot of great press, it just took off. Our sales took off. And all of a sudden we had funding to do more and continue to make more fun, great stories. We became courseware at MIT. We became a favorite for children with autism, among other things, because there was a whole piece in there about how for an autistic child, the world is often too loud. It's too big, too loud, too overwhelming, and they tend to shut down or try to go into some resensing mode. And we heard from one of the parents who wrote us regularly that their daughter, they had 3 children, and one of them was pretty severely autistic and didn't speak. She yelled sometimes, but that was ungrunted, but didn't really talk. And they've been trying to show her the computer because they thought that she would like it, and she wasn't really interested. And then they showed her Just Grandma and Me, and she dove in immediately. And what actually, they let her stay up late playing. And so the other kids could get to bed, and then she would sleep in, and it helped get the other kids off to school in the morning. And her special ed teacher said, "What's going on? She's blossoming, she's blooming." And I was talking with the parents, we began to realize that because most of the time for an autistic child, especially severely autistic, things are too much and you don't feel like you're in control. But inside living books, you have agency. You can have curiosity and agency, and you can replay things if you want them as many times as you want, or you can play, and sometimes different things will happen to kind of keep it lively. And it turns out that she was remapping the real world as if it was the world of living books, where she could go, and her parents they couldn't take her into stores before. And now she could go into stores, and it was like, I can touch you. It's like, I can talk to you if I want to talk to you or not talk to you. And she had changed her worldview. And then one morning she came to the breakfast table and said, "I'm sorry," which was a line from Little Critter inside the story. And her parents almost fell out of the chair because she had now begun talking from what she was learning from the book. And, for me, this was some of the most wonderful payoff for creating living books. Is teachers use them widely. They were in multiple languages, which was very rare at the time. And they went all over the world. And knowing that they touched a lot of people's lives has always been very important to me, and has driven me forward to try and create more content that would make a difference for people.
Mark, what else have you gone on to do since Living Books was disbanded?
Well, I was an animator when I began with Living Books, but I didn't know a lot about child development. And in fact, there were no books on multimedia at the time. It was a new era. The Game Developers Conference was a wonderful early place for all the developers to get together and shared what we were learning. And I was learning so much about interface and how children played inside the environment. I mean, I learned how we created the sentence for the storybook, the lines of the storybook across the top, so that you could hear the whole story by clicking on a button, or you could tap on each word individually. And we recorded each word with the inflection that it had in the other part of the story. So they could go along and they could read it as if it was a storyline. It wasn't flat. Words are all the same. The words are all the same. And they could just click through it. And I watched kids play all the time. And then I saw how the kids who were emerging readers, the 3 to 4 or sometimes 5-year-olds, would click things in order. They would go right down and click out the whole sentence. And because they were doing a thing called mapping, I learned. But the older kids who could already read would take the words and play with them out of the sentence and do other funny things. They make their own sentences by clicking on the words individually. The wind blew up grandma's dress, or whatever they could think of, and then they'd all fall down laughing. And as I began to learn more and more later on after Living Books, I saw how when we moved into the first internet activities, that there are all these new designers who knew nothing about children and how to design for them. And I thought, well, I should put together a little book on just how to create something for children. And somewhere along that line, I got a call from a publisher out of the blue who said, "Oh, we heard you'd be a good person to write this book," and sent me off in the progress of creating what ended up being a 400-page book, Understanding Kids, Play, and Interactive Design, How to Create Games Children Love. And this is my sort of putting everything in my brain that I learned all the years into this book. And it's a gift to the next generation of designers. And I continue to dive into child psychology, and I've learned so many things that I really wish I knew when my children were young. And now I get to use it with my grandchildren, which is helpful and wonderful, how to play more. And I didn't know I was becoming a play expert, but that's where I ended up, and I love it. And in 2000, I created my own company called Noodleworks, and mostly a consulting company where we helped other companies solve problems. They can't get something working, or they don't understand why the audience doesn't like it, or why aren't they engaged, and all that sort of thing. And I can go in, often it's because they're missing the play patterns, and I can go in and make a few adjustments and tune into the play patterns, and then bang, they're off and running with a great product. And when I was working on the book, or my partner and my wife, Barbara Chase, who worked with me at Noodleworks, we thought it was the early days of apps, and we thought we should build an app following the principles that we're putting down in this book. And so we created an app called Noodle Words, which is what if words were toys? And jump and stretches and dances and all that sort of thing. And following up just the same principles. And we went on to win the prize for best educational product of the year in 2011 or 2012. And we found that speech language pathologists loved it because it was kind of an onomatopoeification that worked well for kids who had learning disabilities to understand the concept of a verb. So I was like, oh, okay, you go down one path and then you find out, oh, well, I've actually created something else. And so I've been following up all the things I learned and building on them from Living Books all these years. And then 3 years ago, an old friend of mine, Jim Margraff, who created the Leap Pad for Leapfrog, came to me with this idea about connecting grandparents and grandchildren over video conferencing with activities. And I had already been thinking about it quite a bit. And so we're gone down this path, and we created a company along with my partner, Barbara, and 2 other wonderful partners called Kinoo, KINOO.com. And we have been learning a lot about co-play, because it's different than, my book is about how to create games children love when you're playing with a computer, but now we're playing with grandparents, and they bring a whole other piece to it. And how to support the grandparents so that they feel like they're sharing and getting time with the kids and bonding and creating memories when they're living remotely, or sometimes countries away. And when we first started thinking about it, we talked to a lot of other grandparents, and they said, most of their calls were like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and that was it with their 3 to 6 year olds or 3 to 7 year olds, because the kids aren't interested. They're gone. And with our first prototype for Kinoo, they were playing 25 and 30 minutes. And this just delighted the grandparents no end. So we're continuing on to do that. And alive now.
Mark, fabulous story. And we really appreciate you taking the time to tell us about the creation of Living Books and what it's taking you to today. Thank you very much.
Mickey, it's really been my pleasure, and it's been a pleasure working with you. And I can say that I can't be more delighted that at this time, when I'm in the middle of creating things for grandparents and grandchildren, that Just Grandma and Me, something we built over 30 years ago has now come alive and back onto all these platforms. I think it's a real gift for everybody. Thank you.